think one of the most common questions that I get is, what curriculum do I use? I don't even know where to begin. How do you know what to pick? And honestly, this can be a really hard one. I think a lot of times we tend to go with the biggest names we hear, or the current trends, or what people have shared with us about curriculum that they have specific experience with, and we tend to go with those choices. And it can be a frightening thing when your children's education is in your hands and maybe you don't feel equipped to do it, but you are. I'm going to give some insight today on how I specifically choose my children's language arts programs in our homeschool. Now, if you're new here, I am a mom to 6 kids. My oldest is in 6th grade and my youngest is not quite in school yet. Over the years, I have definitely come up with a way that I evaluate and choose curriculum, not just for the subject of language arts, but pretty much every subject. I kind of follow the same guidelines, and I'm going to go over those today, and I hope you guys enjoy this video. So today's video is actually going to be a collaboration with my friend Ashley over at Joyful Noise Learning. If you are not familiar with Ashley, she is a wealth of knowledge and resources when it comes to homeschooling. She is a mom of 3 beautiful children. She also has a similar background as me as far as previously being a teacher and then coming home to homeschool her own children. And even more so, she is a fabulous resource for this specific video today, since we're talking about language arts, because that is her specific area of expertise. You will definitely want to make sure you check out her video down below. She's going to be talking more about specifically what should be included when you are building a language arts program for your child and choosing curriculum for your child. So you definitely want to make sure you check out that video, and I will put a link to her channel and her video down below. So before we really dive into this and get started, I just want to start by saying, while this can be a daunting and overwhelming task to make sure that you're choosing the right curriculum for your child, it's also an amazing opportunity, because we get to look at our children and our family's needs, and we get to evaluate and assess what curriculum would work best for our child. And we have the autonomy to choose whether or not to continue to use a certain curriculum or not, because maybe it's just not working for our child, or maybe they have some other needs that need to be addressed. And we have the ability to be able to change and control what curriculum our children use. And that is something we should definitely take joy in and be thankful for. So that is where I kind of want to start with how I assess what curriculum to use for each child. So the very first thing I do is I look at what are the individual needs of my children. Okay, so, and I start there because not everyone has neurotypical children. I, for example, have a son who has dyslexia. I have another son who takes a little bit more time to learn reading and language arts. And then I have other children who have taken to it very easily. So it differs from child to child. And that's what I was referring to when I said we have the autonomy to choose what is best for our children. So that is where I start. I look at the overall needs of my children. And if I have a child who has dyslexia, I'm certainly not going to dive them straight into full-on grammar when they can't even read yet, for example. So that's where I start. Broad picture, what are my children's individual needs? Now, beyond my children's individual needs, I also assess what are my needs, since I am the one that's teaching them. For example, when we needed a really strict, strong reading dyslexia program, it was 45 minutes a day of full-on instruction from me and work with him directly. So I had to make sure that I had that time built into my day. And that also affected what I chose for my other children as well. So I have to assess my needs as well. So maybe it could be that you want to homeschool your kids, but maybe you even work from home and you just don't have the time that needs to be devoted to teaching language arts, you could even go to the point of using an online curriculum like Bob Jones Academy or something like that. So there's lots of options. That's what I'm getting at here. So whatever your specific needs are, as far as you being teacher intensive or whatever, assess your child's needs, then your family and your needs next, and then I move on from there. So the next thing I think about is what needs to be covered. And this may be where it's the hard part, especially if you're not really familiar with the realm of education and things like that. This is, I think, where people feel the least confident is what exactly should I make sure I include in my children's language arts programs? There can be some differing viewpoints on this, and this kind of goes with what people's philosophies are for education and homeschooling, but I am not here to go into all of that because especially if you're a new homeschool mom or someone who is really struggling with the confidence to homeschool right now, I don't want to overwhelm you with things that honestly just don't matter. What it comes down to is basically when you are looking at a young child, young elementary age, kindergarten through second, third grade-ish, that is what is more of a learning to read stage. Your main language arts focus at that point should typically be learning to read in general, solidifying and learning to read. Because once they get to that third to fourth grade range and beyond, it switches over to a more reading to learn stage. So you have that learning to read stage, then reading in order to learn stage. Now, I kind of go by that, but again, if you have a child who is more advanced or who maybe is falling behind a little bit, then you want to assess that based on them individually as far as that kind of rule of thumb goes. Concepts that are typically covered under the umbrella of language arts are things like grammar, reading, writing, spelling. So typically those four things. If I'm missing anything, please put them down in the comments. But typically it's those four things: reading, writing, grammar, and spelling. Now, for me personally, the way I do it in our homeschool is when we are talking younger grades, we put the biggest focus on learning to read. Also, I do introduce spelling in first grade because I do feel like that is a good skill to help carry over into solidifying and mastering more of like the phonics and reading concepts, those blends and all of those things. But I don't put a lot of weight on the spelling. The next thing is writing is more exploratory in that stage. I typically have my kids keep a journal every day. I might either give them I might dictate a sentence that they have to write down and then illustrate in their journals, or I might let them have a free write day where I say, okay, write a couple of sentences sharing what you did this weekend or what was your favorite part of going to the zoo, things like that. And they will write that in their journal, and then I go through and I read it, and then I just say, oh, remember we start with a capital letter, or oh, did you mean to put a period there? Little things like that. I don't put a lot of weight on it, but it is just gentle reminders of basic sentence structure. And that is early glimpses at understanding structure and grammar in sentence writing and things like that. I do not do a lot of grammar. We might talk about nouns, we might talk about verbs, but that's it. We don't go any further than that, really. I might encourage them to use describing words when they write. Oh, what color was the bird you saw at the zoo? So they might write in the blue bird at the zoo, something like that. But I don't put a lot of emphasis on grammar when they're in those younger elementary years. Now, once we hit third to fourth grade is typically when I look for programs that offer some focus on more formal grammar type things. So, and this is like basic rule of thumb for me. So, and again, some people are different. If you are using a more traditional program like a Becca or Bob Jones or something like that, then you're going to get into those concepts a lot sooner. But in my experience as a mom who's been homeschooling for many years and for our family's needs, and what I have observed in my own children, they can, quote, catch up with where they're supposed to be grammatically speaking when they get to that developmental stage where they can really understand and grasp the concept of grammar. It doesn't have to be done when they're super young. So that's just kind of where I am on that. So I talked about how the main emphasis in those younger years is focusing more on learning to read, but what about when they do get to that 3rd and 4th grade mark and beyond, where more of the emphasis is on the reading to learn, like I mentioned, and more of like the formal grammar lessons and things like that. So typically I will look for a program. One of the ones that's kind of a go-to for me is something like Fix-It Grammar. We have also used analytical grammar in the past, which is a lot more formalized type grammar, but it's a really good program and we enjoyed it when we used it. I will typically choose something like Fix-It Grammar that goes over those grammar concepts, has them directly apply them. It also includes some vocabulary and things like that. But as far as the reading aspect of things, it's still very important to include that part. It just looks different than in the younger years. The way that I approach the older years in the reading part of language arts is I try to see how I can incorporate it into our other studies. So kind of interdisciplinary, so to speak, where I'm combining different subjects to kind of capitalize on our time, but also really good quality literature. So typically how I do that is I love literature-based histories. And if you've been around my channel for any amount of time, you know that I'm huge in that. I have lots of videos on like our read alouds and morning basket times and the read alouds that we choose to go with our history programs and what history programs in general that we use. And that literature-based program is really important to me because I use it, like I said, in an interdisciplinary way where the read alouds and things might correlate with what we're learning in history, but it's also going to be great literature that we can use as part of the reading aspect of our language arts curriculum. And that is one way you can really kind of capitalize on what you're choosing as far as curriculum, because you can combine subjects a little bit. And so that's one thing that I always look at when I am deciding what to do with my kids. The other thing I look at is, can it be used with multiple ages? Being a mom of 6 kids and having to divide my time homeschooling, I want my kids to have a really good quality education, but we also want to make good use of our time. And believe it or not, there's actually quite a bit of curriculum that you can use and stretch over varying age groups of kids. So I mentioned Fix-It Grammar earlier. It is actually a really good example of a grammar program that can be used with multiple ages. For example, if you have a 3rd grader who's really ready for that more formalized grammar and also a 5th grader who's right there as well, then you can actually use the same level of Fix-It Grammar together, and that is a beautiful thing when you can combine subjects like that. So look for those ways. Now, we actually do that with our writing program. So that was the other thing I was going to add. So once my kids are in that 3rd to 4th grade range, I do like to start a more formalized writing. But this is really hard for me, admittedly, because writing is something that has always come pretty easy to me. And I can't quite wrap my brain around how to teach writing without getting a little frustrated, honestly. Like, I'm just being honest here. And so I chose to use IEW Structure and Style, which I'm actually using with my 4th grader and my 6th grader together. So that's just another example. And also, because it is something that I struggle with teaching to my kids, I actually chose to do the video-based lessons from Structure and Style from IEW instead of just following the teacher's manual and teaching it to them myself. So talking about that time aspect and what my needs are, that is an area where I assessed, you know what? I am just not ready to dive into teaching that to my kids. I don't feel confident enough in me being able to have the patience to teach them this. And they just do an excellent job on the videos teaching that style of writing, and it has worked well for us. Now, after this initial level of structure and style, I am starting to build confidence by watching the lessons with them, and that is helping me to see, you know what, I think I can teach this because I understand how their style of writing works. And so maybe then I could switch over to just getting the books and teaching it myself to my kids in the coming levels of their curriculum. With all that said, I know that's a lot of information and walking through how I personally choose language arts curriculum, but I know I'm not getting into what do I actually choose. And the reason I'm not getting into that is because, number one, I have done curriculum videos where I share what I'm using for each of my children in the past. So if you're interested in that, I can link those down below. I typically do them by grade. But also the other reason is because this is a very personal decision. It's something that without knowing your situation, your child, I don't want to sit and give advice on. I can share my own experiences. I can share how I choose it. I can share what I choose for my own kids. But I don't feel like it's appropriate for me to sit and share what curriculum you should choose, because I don't think there's any one thing that I would recommend, because each situation is so different. And again, like I said at the beginning, that's the beauty of this whole homeschooling venture, is that we have that autonomy. And honestly, from an educational standpoint, that is my favorite part about homeschooling, is the fact that we are able to choose what is best for our kids and for our family, and to fit the needs that we are looking for. So the biggest thing is assess the needs, whether it's your child, your family's needs, whatever. Look at the things you need to include, the things that you think are developmentally appropriate in your child, because typically K through 2, those younger years, it is more typical to do not as big emphasis on grammar and more on the reading. But maybe you have a child who is very gifted, and when they're in first grade, they're more the equivalent of like third grade as far as understanding reading and the concepts of writing and all that kind of stuff. That's where that assessment of your child's needs comes into play. I hope you found this video helpful. Make sure you head over and check out Ashley's video as well. See you on future videos. Make sure you push that subscribe button, and I will see you guys later.